Are Votann still fun to play? We'll find out in this episode of Dice Club. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Dice Club, where we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into Votann with my buddy Lane, who've been playing Votann since they've come out. So no, I don't think there's anybody better that can answer some of these questions. And if you have questions, leave them in a comment. We'll talk about it afterwards or message you or whatever. But before we do that, let's pay some bills. Like to ask everybody, hit a like, subscribe, notification button. It really does help the channel grow. And I'd like to thank everybody who's done so already. Also, take a look in the description below. I would ask you to consider joining, being a member. I have just 3 different tiers of membership. And 2 of those tiers, you have an opportunity to get a billboard, a customized billboard that you can put on your own channel that we will customize it. Our winner this month was Kyle. Kyle asked me to take the recess sign and just sign his name on there in graffiti. Kyle was here. That's what we did. I also changed it up and put Jessica Jones on that one because just to show that we can do other things. So hit the link in the description below. Check it out. See what the membership's all about. And I'd ask again, thank you for those who have become a member, and thank you for just even considering about becoming a member. Now, with all the bills paid, with all that being said, let's get into the meat and potatoes of what you guys came for. My buddy Lane's here to talk about Votann. Maybe get some ideas from him if you play Votann. So let's start off right off the rip because we don't have much lore on Votann.
Right.
So,
well, I'm not really a lore specialist, so that's not a good place to start with me.
Yeah, so normally we do start with lore, Lane, but
I guess the interesting thing about them is just the game lore of them. The fact that they came out in Rogue Trader in 2nd edition and they existed at that time, and then they relatively quickly just mothballed them. Took them out of the game, so they didn't exist anymore. You can still find old metal Votann models, squat models from back in the day. They're real hard to come by, but it's interesting that they took them away for so long, and the way they brought them back with the April Fool's reveal where they showed us a new Votann model, like, April Fool's, guys, it's the new model, and then a day later said, no, for real, we're actually doing it. And I was pretty excited about that just because I like the old Warhammer stuff. I played in 2nd edition, so I was excited to see something old school come back.
Right.
So
I will say this. So Games Workshop, if you're listening to this, probably the best video ever put out was when James Workshop was talked about Votann on Christmas, about being the greatest faction ever. That was actually really funny. If you haven't checked that one out, if you are big into this game, watch that one. It's pretty good. James Workshop was actually right on that one. I thought he did a great job.
Include an RTT trophy in every starter box. Yeah,
I thought what they did was they mocked themselves a lot, and then mocked the community a little bit. So
they gave it to everybody.
They gave it to everybody. Everybody it was great. I loved it. So let's talk about Votann. So obviously, like everything, there's a big difference between 9th edition, 10th edition. So play styles go from 9th to 10th. How do you think the play style worked from 9th edition, and did it carry over to 10th edition?
They felt like a more elite army in 9th edition if you played them in 9th.
Right.
I mean, you certainly in 9th edition used a lot fewer models than what you need now in 10th, especially since the points drops where you need more models than you did before. Guess what? You got to buy more toys. But they definitely felt more elite. And their playstyle was somewhat more durable because they had Armor of Contempt built in with the Void Armor. You couldn't reroll wounds against them. So they had all these stacked abilities that made their damage output higher. Their consistency was incredible because you had multiple ways to give out rerolls. You could, the Chapter Master rerolls from the High Call would let one squad reroll all its hits. You had a 1 CP strat that's something else. It could be a squad, it could be a hecaton. Anything else could reroll all its hits. And then you had ways of giving out more rerolls, and with the judgment tokens, which
were so broken.
Yeah, if you don't remember, if something had 1 judgment token on and 6s to hit, shooting and fighting, auto wounded. If it was 2 judgment tokens, it was 5s, and 3 judgment tokens, it was 4s to hit, auto wounded. And between the rerolls and the auto wounding, it was just an incredibly consistent army to play if you were taking advantage of all that. So it was very high damage output, somewhat elite. somewhat fragile in some cases. Now, the hecatons were super durable, especially because we had the ability to zero out a failed armor save. But some things like the jet bikes and the infantry were less durable because they're 4-up saves. But it was still
much shots.
Yeah, it put out a lot of high value shots, consistently wounding anything and everything. Because of the auto wounds, it doesn't matter how tough the target was, or if it was -1 to wound, it didn't matter. Auto wounds just went right through. So it was very more elite and very consistent in how it put out damage.
Gotcha. And then and the other thing was, those bike units, 6-man bike units that you ran all the time.
Yeah, they were really strong. Just because they had ways of getting extra AP depending on the league you played, and extra range on the guns. They were just incredibly efficient, ignoring cover, and the fact that I would usually bring them in from reserves, so you couldn't really target them until they dropped in and just wiped a bunch of your army.
Exactly.
I think my record at one point was that I did, in one round of shooting in turn 2, I picked up 1,300 points of a Tau army, just in one phase, just one shooting phase. That's it. So their damage output was ridiculous.
Now let's fast forward now to currently. And 10th edition. So the difference is obviously the shooting is not as effective. Still good. It's not as effective.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot different. I think one of the things too from 9th edition was the way you gave out judgment tokens, the way they accumulated, and said there's more play to that.
Right.
They definitely reduced that for 10th edition and changed their function, so there's no more auto wounds. So there's a couple things you kind of have to adjust for. Is that there are no rerolls to hit in the army.
Right.
Now, where before there were multiple ways you can get reroll hits on multiple units, so you lose a lot of that efficiency. And sometimes, and I've played a lot. I played probably 150 games with Votann in 9th edition. You just kind of internalize a lot of the way units work. Like, I know how much damage this unit will do when I put in the rerolls and do this and judgment tokens. And so in 10th edition, you're giving out fewer judgment tokens, although the ability to put 2 on 4 different units is definitely a big plus now that they added that. But you're just less consistent, and so you have to prepare for sometimes some of your units just whiff, because their points are a lot lower. You can have more units on the table. The hecatons are at least 100 points less than what they were before, but they'll also just do nothing. I've had times when I've shot hecatons and they've just done 0 damage, where in 9th edition they would have hurt something. They would have put work into something. So it's just, you have to adjust to what each unit's going to do.
Okay, so now we're keeping staying 10th edition. Obviously more terrain on the board.
Yeah.
Judgment tokens are a little different now. How do you think the play style is? What do you think the play style to be as effective with?
Well, I think
is it a fast army? Is it not a fast army? Just shooting? Does it stay stationary? What is it? What do they want to do?
I think you really just have to play 10th edition. You have to play into the tactical objectives, because especially with the point drops, you have a lot of cheap units. You can take small, cheap units, smaller vehicles like the Sagittars, and put, half a squad of Hearthkin warriors in it. They can go out and do an objective. You can deep strike in individual characters or units and that sort of thing. So you just really have to focus around understanding that your damage output is going to be way different. Not just the regular step down from 9th to 10th that everybody experienced a reduction in damage output going from 9th to 10th. But understand, Votann took it a lot harder than that. So you have to base it around, you're going to do some amount of damage, but you need to focus on scoring those primaries and secondaries.
So that's basically, I understand that part of it. That's basically playing the mission. And I do understand that Army has to do that, because I think 10th edition is...
You play the game.
Yeah, 10th edition now is strictly... I know there's a lot of armies that can still kill. I get it. But like you mentioned, there's not a lot of stuff that are killy. So I understand that the play style for them is to play the mission, but do they play it like with speed? Do they play it with just durability? Do they play it with just the multiple, just a lot of models? How are they playing the mission better than, let's say, Tau is, or better than Space Marines are?
Yeah, there's a lot of things they have going for them. And so, for example,
in other words, Lane, what do you want? What are you leaning into? With Votann that you're not leaning into with some other armies?
Recognizing, you have to recognize the disposability of the army, and also the value of certain, like, for example, both the Pioneer jet bikes and the Sagittars have scout moves. So in our game that we played, turn 2, I scored really well on primaries, because I was able to pregame move and get out on all the objectives. I was on all 3 of the objectives in No Man's Land,
Right.
but also understand that I was going to get slapped back for that. Those
Right.
those units weren't going to be there in 2 or 3 more turns.
Right. So the trading game.
Yeah, it's very much about trading, and
do they trade well?
I think they do because the points are so low. And we talked about this a little bit in the post game, after we finished our game. But for example,
but real quick, this probably won't come out. If you watch the bat rep will come out before this will actually. So you'll be able to know what we're talking about if you watch the bat rep. Good.
Okay. So, but essentially, I used a 6-man squad of the Thunderkin, the heavy weapon guys, and brought them in from reserve. And they picked up Plague Burst Crawler in 1 round of shooting, and then tied up another key unit of yours for the rest of the game.
Boom. Spoiler alerts.
And they won the whole game, and they destroyed all of the Death Guard. There were no Death Guard left after the Thunderkin Warriors. But it.
No, I know.
It doesn't really spoil that, but it's certain things happen. Right. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
But essentially, they, for 150 points versus what they killed and what they tied up, they were well worth it.
Right.
But I think the trick is that with the Votann in 9th edition, they could kill anything. Something like those jet bike squads would be really good into anything.
Right.
Vehicles, hard targets, invulns, it doesn't matter what it was, infantry, it would wipe it out. And now you have to be much more selective as to what targets you go at. Because in our game, we saw there were certain times that I would just pick up a whole bunch of Plague Marines, and then I would just whiff into Mortarion and do barely any damage with a lot of my army. I put 1,000 points worth of shooting into them and do 5 or 6 wounds.
Again, spoiler alert. Come on, Lane, you're killing me.
Okay.
We're not talking about our game anymore.
Save time and just listen to me talk about the bat rep.
Exactly.
Okay. So
you don't have to tell you the bat rep. Just listen to Lane ruin everything.
Should I lie about things that happen now?
No,
and be like,
just don't talk about
the 4 things I talk about in the game. 2 of them are true, 2 of them are not.
I'm
true.
just kidding.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
Oh no, I was just saying you have to be much more selective about what units go after what targets. Obviously, and overall the damage is down, but their just broad ability to hurt anything has been changed quite a bit.
Right.
So that's another thing to keep in mind.
And they don't know if we're actually talking about the bat rep game or another game that we may have played.
You'll have to watch the bat rep and find out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. So the data slate, we touched a little bit about points, and we know how they play and what they lean into very well. And they trade better than some other armies do.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Data slate had a pretty nice effect. The data slate did affect them pretty positively.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if your army is underpowered, a lot of times just the point adjustments are not enough to fix it. But it was interesting in this case that it may have been not to make them overpowered, but to make them at least a comparable army so you can enjoy your games and not feel like you're getting wiped. I think the points adjustments were enough to make a significant difference to how well they played. You got to make sure you've got enough models in your collection now, because in 9th edition, like I said, they were fairly elite. Right. I have to put my whole collection on the table now, but it definitely was enough to have an impact and make them at least a mid-tier army.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think so far in a couple of games that we showed on the channel since the data slate came out, I think the points drops have been pretty effective. Mm-hmm. Just the points drops. I mean, Death Guard for sure it helped them, and which isn't out yet. But Matt's Tau, it helped. It helped Tau as well. It does put more. Sisters took a points drop, so they're getting out more on the table. So I do agree, but they also changed other stuff, and then it changed something else, right?
Yeah. So the key change to the rules was that in the index, at the start of the game, you would be able to pick one enemy unit, whether it was on the table or not, and put 2 judgment tokens on it, because the max is the 2 judgment tokens now in this edition. And if you killed that unit, you would get some extra command points in your next command phase. And it depended on how early in the game you did it. So if you killed it turn 1, so by the end of, by your first command phase, if you had killed that unit, you would get 3 CP and then down the line. And that was important because it's very difficult, much more difficult to get out judgment tokens than it was in the past edition.
Right.
So
and it's a high reward.
Yeah. I mean, you get the +1 to hit for 1 judgment token and +1 to wound for 2. So it's absolutely essential. The army doesn't function very well without it. So they changed that. So now you can give out 4 units. 4 enemy units will get those judgment tokens at the start of the game.
Right.
And that's perfect because you can pick 3 targets that you're going to need that extra hitting and extra damage. And, 3 of the worst, enemy units that you're going to have to deal with. to work on those, and then pick one that you can kill turn one.
Right.
That's exactly what may or may not have happened in our game, but you'll have to watch it to find out.
May or may not have.
Yeah, a lot of times I find that my games that I play in general, I'll pick some weak unit that's out there,
right?
And then maybe do like it's got the scout moves pre-game with the bikes to get out there, kill that thing, boom, 3 CP in my next turn. So
which is actually real quick. Just thinking about this as we're talking, is when you have scouts or anybody that's pre-game moving, right? Did you pick those judgment tokens before you figure out, or after you figure out what? When did you pick the 4?
It just says at the start of the game.
At the start of the game. So so you get.
I think it's probably after the roll off. So
so after the roll off. So wherever it is, but if someone's running some scouts out there or some infiltrators or something, and they're coming out in the middle of the board, you're like, they're judged, and I'm just going to get 4 CP or 3 CP right off the rip.
Yeah,
which is such a good. I mean, number one, the reroll hits. I'm sorry, +1 to hit, +1 to wound. Effective.
Yeah,
I mean, we saw that in our game. It's effective. You've experienced that in our games. It's effective in other games, right? 3 CP in turn 1. And possible 2 CP in turn 2.
Yeah.
It's pretty effective.
Yeah.
I mean, loading up with CP, and we'll talk a little bit about strats later on, but loading up with CP is pretty nice.
Especially, I mean, because most armies have fewer strats now, the strats are usually pretty good. And Votann have got some key ones that are really strong that can do some work. So having that extra CP makes a difference. Yeah,
for sure. And then let's talk a little bit about pros and cons. I know we kind of touched on this a little bit. So pros, what do you think some of the pros are? This is where you get this is essentially what I want you to do is like over pride in your army, right? Like this is what I think, what Lane thinks Votann does. That's super good.
Right. I think they do trade well if you're playing smart about what units you're trading. It's not everything you want to trade, but certain things. I think they trade well. I think they can put out a tremendous volume of shots, which often counters high armor saves or invuln saves or that sort of thing. So you can do a volume of shots. Like, well, the army that I have in the battle report has a couple hecatons and fewer things, but I'm building more infantry because some of them just put out a lot of shots. And I'm going to build like just a maximum number of shot list. So you have the ability that volume can often counter just a few swingy dice here and there. And I think they're still fun. They're cool little space dwarfs. I love the models. I like the design of them. So I'm enjoying all those aspects.
And that's the biggest thing too. And we talk about, you guys heard us talk about this all the time. I always look, we understand there's value. There's understanding. And me and Lane were talking about this before we hit the camera roll. You want to still have fun because your rule of cool is still cool, still fun. But at the same time, you don't want to just show up and get wiped off the board, even in a real casual garage hammer game. But I don't think Votann's at that point. I think Votann is actually pretty fun. Yeah. Are you having fun with it now that they changed stuff?
Yeah, you have it's a little bit more forgiving in some ways because occasionally you can lose a unit, and now that unit's not as many points. You still have a lot of stuff that can do work, so you have some forgiveness there. If you want a GT, you're gonna have to play pretty precisely. But just when you're playing against your friend, it's okay. I misplayed a couple things in our game. I set up to cleanse on 3 objectives and didn't need to. Like, what am I doing? I exposed things I didn't expose. But then I lost.
Stop talking about our game. All right. So we're going to move on.
We're going to have to record this whole thing over again.
So underrated, or I'm sorry, cons. So in the con area, when we talk about pros and cons, there's the stuff that we really liked about the Army, obviously our opinion. What is the stuff that you don't like? So if you were to say in a very nice, productive, positive way, talking to Games Workshop, what would you say? Hey, you know what? Just take a look at this because it's not thrilling.
Right. I think the big guns are just so inconsistent now. Like I can understand that the Magna Rail rifle, the Magna Rail, heavy Magna Rail, and the Hecaton in the last edition maybe is a little too powerful, but now it's just so swingy. Especially when you're nerfing my ballistic skill, it's like, okay, well, I need to hit it with a 5, and I don't have any rerolls of any kind. And then I still need to roll the wound, and it's devastating wounds, but I still need to roll.
What he's talking about is not the command point reroll.
And you always have a command point reroll. Yeah. But I think the big that's why I'm looking at dropping the hecatons, because they're big guns. Sometimes they pop off and sometimes they don't.
Right.
I'd rather just have more shots, more volume. So I think some of those things just feel not great sometimes.
For the points.
Yeah, in the 4 or 5 games that I've played with them so far, the Magna Rail has really only popped off once, which may or may not have been this game we played. But it's only popped off really one time out of 4 or 5 games. Right. And most of the time I just throw that it's missing, and it's, there's so that's a bit of a frustration there, obviously.
So we didn't talk about this during games or when we talked, but is there other guns that would be better than using the Magna Rail?
The other one is the conversion beamer, which is there's a third one which I haven't used before, so I might take a look at that. The conversion beamer one is 2 shots. If you're more than 12 inches away, and it's only got a 24-inch range, if you roll 4s, then it's D3 sustained. So it's like, again, it's incredibly swingy. You can't rely on it. And the one time it popped off in a game that I played recently, it popped off, but then didn't pop off. So, but because you can still, the AP isn't that great. So sometimes saves are still made, or invulns are still made. So it just feels less consistent than it has in the past.
I also want to ask you this, because I think Tau has the same problem, and you Tau players will agree with this, I believe. And guard players, actually, guard was the same problem. And again, I understand why they have the 4 ballistic, because they shoot, it's a ton of shots. So the 4 ballistic skill in Tau, AdMac, guard, and Votann could, when you get -1 to hit, that's why these judgment tokens are pretty good. But I think that would be and I know you have to do it. Believe me, I get why you have to do it, because playing that army and getting shot off the board because you're hitting on 3s does not feel good. So I get why it's got to be 4 up. I understand it completely. Look, I understand that. I get it. But that also doesn't feel good when you're rolling a lot of dice.
I've made people feel real bad with my Votann in the past.
So the rest of us who are now in 10th edition are like, 4 ups.
Right. Well, it's still, it's fine. It doesn't have to be as powerful, but something like the Magna Rail that's 1 shot, and it's like, well, it's so swingy, you don't have any kind of way to rely on it. And so that's, like I said, I'm just going to adjust my list around that a little bit. Other than that, I think the other real big con is that the characters are not really well designed with their buffs and things. Some of them just aren't providing much.
So describe, like, what do you mean?
Well, like Uthar the Destined in 9th edition, he would let any unit around him change 1 dice roll to a 6, a single die roll, once per battle round, right? So it could be an invuln save or an armor save, or it could be like to do the damage roll on something, change that. Well, in this edition, he can do that for himself. And his gun is 1 damage, devastating wounds. So you can proc off 1 devastating wound. Or in close combat, his close combat weapon is devastating wounds, and it's 2 damage. So if you get him into combat, he can do 2 damage with a devastating wound. It's one of those things, and he doesn't. They don't buff their units very well, so he's one I'm not even going to bother playing him. But sometimes, for example, I use the Forge Master, the Tech Marine type guy. A lot of it has to do with the fact that he's got his little robot buddies, which function as ablative wounds on his unit. He gives the unit +1 to hit, which is good, right? Except, what does a Judgment token do?
Gives him
+1 to hit.
But you saw that could be minus. There's a lot of minuses in this game.
Yeah, it has some value, and like I said, I can use it with the Thunderkin with their grav guns that are anti-vehicle 2-up, so I can actually do damage to a vehicle that has no judgment tokens, because it gives +1 to hit. So it has use, but there's so many times in that use is just negated. It's just useless.
And I think going from 9th to 10th edition, where we took out a lot of rerolls, where the characters will buff rerolls or get minus a plus to hit, where as 10th edition or 9th edition players, and even 8th edition, when you go back further, I think sometimes we miss the fact that they did say that this is less killy. And sometimes the characters don't. It seems like some characters, at least in the index, aren't getting the abilities off, like you just said, to to make him more playable in a unit, make him more cohesive.
Well, yeah, I mean, I play against a Necron player quite a bit, and he has enhancement that just lets his character give everything within 6 inches +1 to hit.
Yeah.
Vehicles, like it's wildly powerful. And then the Votann ones are like, well, maybe helps a smidge,
Right.
Like, oh, he lets his unit reroll charges.
Right.
It's good if you are going to make a charge, I guess. But it can help maybe a little bit. But no, there's nothing that feels as powerful as other armies have. That's what I'm comparing.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I agree with you totally. So we just kind of touched on character, so we don't need to talk really a whole lot about that. But is there a character out there that you feel? I mean, you have to bring a character because you need a warlord. But is there a character out there that is worth his weight?
Well, they did some things with the points to reduce so that they're fairly cheap. And like, for example, the Einherjar champion, the E-champ, he normally would use him to lead Hearthguard, but for 60 points, and he has the deep strike keyword,
right?
He could just be a deep strike tool to drop in and get on an objective or score behind enemy lines, or do an action or something. So there's some interesting play, because I know the Art of War guys, they been running the Grimnir, the Psyker, standalone, kind of like I did today. I was trying that out for the first time, because his psychic attack is 6 attacks, and it's pretty strong, especially once going into something with judgment tokens. It's 6 attacks, strength 6. It hits on 2s. His ballistic skill is 2. And then with a judgment token, it's going to be +1. So even if it's negative, it's still hitting. And it's AP2, D3 damage. It's really strong. So they've been just running them individually without even a unit. They don't have lone operative, but there might be some play to.
What's the points on him?
So I think he's also about 60. I'd have to look it up. It's pretty low point cost for something that can ride around in a little transport, pop out, and then do some damage and maybe do an action or something. So there's some interesting play there. And then the Hearthguard, the baby Terminators, they're really good right now. People are running a lot of them. I just don't have more than 5 painted up yet. Right. But their special rule is that when they are led by a character, -1 to wound, obviously really super strong.
Yeah, super strong. Really, actually, that -1 to wound right now, because a lot of that in this edition.
Yeah,
-1 to wound is actually pretty good. Really, really helpful. So let's talk about overrated, underrated. Let's first hit. Let's start negatively. What's the most overrated? I don't say negatively. We'll start overrated stuff.
I think the Hecatons, even though their points are so much lower, I'm not really happy with what they do. For how many points are there, how many shots they put out. Even though they're ignoring cover.
How many points are they?
I don't know. 200 something. Wait, let me get myself. There we go. We'll take a look. As we're talking about points, I probably ought to take a look and see what the points actually are.
Yeah. But whatever they are, you're feeling
225, which is pretty cheap,
yeah, but if you don't think the damage is,
and they're transport, and they're tough, and they're durable, but just the way I play them, other people might be taking them, and they're 2-up armor. 16 wounds.
Well, this is all based on our opinions.
Yeah,
right?
But just when I needed them to do some damage, a lot of times they just whiff, and that's the thing. I can't really rely on them. Right. Where for 150 points, if I can take 6 Thunderkin that are going to put out 66 shots plus blast on all those, it's like I'd rather just drop them in from reserve. So I definitely, like I said, in my list, I'm planning to drop them out. They're not bad. They have play. I can't rely on them.
But in your play style, it's not. Those are overrated in your playstyle.
Yeah.
How about underrated? What's the most underrated? Now, again, you guys may be doing this. If you're Votann players, you may be doing this, and where you may not agree because your playstyle is different. We're basing it on Lane's playstyle, so that's what we're going by. So, Lane, what?
I think the Pioneer jet bikes, people are taking them in the 3-mans just to be little action monkeys and that sort of thing. I still like taking them in the big 6-mans because
what's the points?
I think they are precisely 180 points for a 6-man.
For 6-man.
Yeah, 90 points for a 3-man.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah, and I didn't use the stratagem in our game, but there's a stratagem that gives the whole unit sustained, and it's sustained 2 if they have judgment tokens on the target.
Oh, that's really good.
And that unit puts out a lot of shots. I forget the math, but with a 6-man, when they start using strats on them, just that multiplies, whether it's Overwatch or whether it's fall back and shoot or whatever it may be. So I think their damage output is still pretty good. Most people are just taking them as action monkeys, but I think their volume of shots is great.
Well, I think if you take them as 3, that's probably why, right? If you're making them, you're using them as the ability to move up the field, and you got that scout move, which is 12 inches or 10 inches or 9 inches, whatever it was.
Yeah, it's 9 inches.
9 inches, you got that 9-inch scout. They kick out so many shots. So they're going to be able to lift. Yeah. You're shooting at any kind of chaff, they're just lifting them off the board.
Yeah, I mean, any infantry, Marines, especially with their autocannons or strength 7, and if the target has judgment tokens, it's +1 to wound. They're wounding most infantry on 2s. Just so even through the volume of that, it's going to pick up whatever they're looking at.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. We talked a little bit about characters, strats. We could touch on just a couple strats that you enjoy, a couple strats you don't think are more situational.
Yeah, I mean, Overwatch is really good with the Thunderkin because they Overwatch on 5s, and so you can just get almost in a whole extra round of shooting sometimes,
And they kick out like 700 shots.
But yeah, especially with Blast, if you're going into like a 10-man unit or something,
right.
they're going to put out a bunch of shots. Being able to fall back and shoot is hugely important because to fall back and shoot, but also to fall back and do actions.
Right, exactly.
Which is something that comes into play sometimes. I know with Death Guard, they've got the bloat drones, which can fall back and shoot and charge,
right.
which is useful for attacking, but also for actioning when you need to get out of combat and do an action. So fall back and shoot is great. And then they do have the reactive shot strat where for 2 CP, it is 2 CP, but they can shoot back after being shot. Yep. So just with all the different ways they can put out shooting damage and all the ways they can do it out of phase,
right.
with the all the stratagems, they can put out a lot of damage.
That actually that's better than a lot of other things can shoot. To be quite honest with you, but shooting out of phase is really effective.
Yeah,
I mean Overwatch strat now that it changed, it's pretty good, and being able to kick out 60 shots from a unit, hitting on 5s, like you were saying, really good.
Yeah, well, I picked up some models with that in our game. Stay tuned to find out.
Yeah, there's also obviously he's played other games than just the one that we played. So enhancements. Got a good enhancement. What do you?
There are a bunch of enhancements. Or
do you not take any?
Well, I've been taking 2 of them because one of them just because of the points. So I have the Iron Master, the Tech Marine guy leading the Thunderkin, because he gives them +1 to hit. Then he has an enhancement that allows them to ignore any modifiers, to dice rolls or anything other than armor saves, of course. So that's helpful for them, and it lets them reroll failed battle shock tests too. So I have the points, so I put that in there, and that just makes his unit a little more efficient at shooting. Right. And then the other one is Appraising Glare. That's the one in my command phase. I pick one objective that my opponent controls, and everything that my opponent has that's within range of that objective, within 3 inches of the objective, counts as having an additional judgment token. Right. It's more difficult to get out judgment tokens in this edition, so just being able to do that gives us a little bit more, a little more token. Yeah,
puts everything +1 to hit.
And it's in my command phase. It goes until my next command phase. So a lot of times, if my opponent's trying to score on the center or something, I know I can at least make it a little more difficult for him.
Exactly. What about an enhancement you don't use all the time?
I don't remember the names of them because I don't use them.
Because you don't use them all the time.
Yeah.
They're very situational. We don't use them.
Yeah, I'm sure they're great for other people. I don't remember what it's called.
Combos. Is anything? I know you talked about it already. A little bit of one with the guys at the guys at oh, my mind just went blank. The little guys that were shooting they had blast weapons.
Yeah.
With the character.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the Thunderkin with the Thunderkin. With the Iron Master, because his gun also is an anti-vehicle 2-up gun, so he actually adds some more firepower to their unit. He's got 3 shots, so it adds nice. It adds to his unit. It makes him a little bit stronger. He's got 4 of his little robot buddies with him, and so they become ablative wounds on the unit because they're not characters, so you can just take the damage on them. Right. And that happened in our game. I think you hit them with something and they absorb some damage, so it just makes them stick around a little bit longer. So that combination of +1 to hit for his unit and then his extra shots and then just taking some damage to keep the unit around a little bit longer definitely pays off.
And the other thing too, for example, and this, I don't think this actually happened in our game, but as I'm thinking about this, they're anti-infantry too, right? That unit,
anti-vehicle too. Yeah.
So all that shots hitting on 2s, 2 judgment tokens, right?
They'll hit on 3s. Their ballistic skills 4.
I mean,
so they'll go to
hit
3
on 3s, but
yeah.
Your +1. Oh, I guess it wouldn't matter because they're already hitting on 2s, so it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
My thought was you could add one with the wound with the judgment token, but you're already wounding on 2s.
Well, that's the thing that's really great about them, because they're anti-vehicle 2-up. People are like, oh, you use them for vehicles, but they're blast D6 and they're strength 5.
Yeah.
So if you go into an infantry unit that's T4 and it has 2 judgment tokens, you're wounding them on 2s still.
Which is really nice.
Like I've used them to wreck big squads, the Black Templar Crusader squads with 20 guys in them. Man, you get blast into them, and then you're wounding them on 2s because they're only T4, and it's AP2, 2 damage. It does a lot of work. Like 20-man Necron Warrior blobs.
Tyranid swarms.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, and I could see why you want to build more into that. How much is that unit?
It's 150 points for 6 of them. You can take a 3-man for 75, but it's so cheap. And
155?
150 for a 6-man.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's actually really good.
Yeah.
So many shots.
Yeah, and they're
really
T6, 3 wounds with 3-up armor, so they have some durability. They're not chumps. They don't disappear right away. So.
And are they battle line? Or no?
No, the only battle line is the Little Hearthstone Warriors.
So 3. So roll 3. Any other combos?
I can't really think of anything off the top of my head.
I mean, that's a pretty strong one, though.
Yeah, that's one. I mean, putting the Einherjar champion with the Hearth Guard is good because he lets his unit reroll charges. So if you come in from deep strike with them, you might have a 9-inch charge release. You get to reroll it for free. That's a nice little benefit there. But that's just a basic character benefit.
So here's the last question that I'm going to start asking the guests, because we're getting close on time. Is wish list for the codex. What would you like to? You've already seen 2 codexes now. I know the other one we're picking up today, but the Space Marine ones. But we saw 2 codexes already. We kind of have an idea what they're going to look like. What's the wish list, if anything, at the moment for Votann?
I think I'd like a new unit. I'd like a character that can kind of accompany the jet bikes,
right?
Because I think as a model that would be super cool. Have a jet bike character. You could do a whole lot of converting with that and make it up really cool.
Right.
Have someone leading the jet bikes and have a nice buff for them. And then they in the kill team box release, they released a kill team for the Hearthstone Warriors. One of the Hearthstone Warriors had a jump pack. So having some jump pack warriors might be neat, or jump pack squad. Although we do have a lot of mobility with the jet bikes already, but again,
with jump packs would be cool. I mean, this is a wish list, man. This is right now. Games Workshop is like, hey, Stu, if you're listening,
Stu,
this is what he wants.
Stu. But no, as far as rules,
Stu, number one, let me say this real quick. Stu Black, dude, you're awesome, man. I do enjoy watching meta watches with that dude.
But I think I would like there to be more ways to give out judgment tokens. And I'm not just talking about making them more powerful. I thought they were more fun in 9th edition because if you did an action, I would give you a judgment token. Right. I just love the idea that the dwarfs were furious that their opponents were doing anything. Oh, you raised a banner? That's a judgment token. You do anything. You're holding an objective, judgment token. It's just fun that the idea of the dwarves who are angry and hold a grudge, that came out in the gameplay. And so I'd like to see more ways to give them out.
It fits the Middle Earth.
Yeah,
it fits the Middle Earth.
Just a grumpy dwarf,
like persona.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I'd like to see more ways to give them out, and then going up to a 3rd judgment token could just increase the AP, because other than a couple heavy weapons, there's there's not a lot of AP. There's a lot of AP1, and it is some units can ignore cover, which is strong, but still in the 2-up armor stuff, still you can just spike those 3s. But
let me clarify. We're not saying that little people are angry. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that
fantasy little people,
fantasy in Middle Earth, like Middle Earth dwarf type people are. It's fun in that. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about actual, real human beings. So just to clear that up, I don't want anybody getting that. So wish list is good. It's awesome. And then so just that jump packs, biker character. You have GW's attention, man, right now. So
yeah, I think that's really it.
Ask him what you want, man.
Yeah, just like I said, just a little more fun with the judgment tokens because they were hilarious and fun.
So we're gonna get probably maybe 4. What were the detachments? In the 9th edition codex.
Yeah.
The 9th edition codex. What was?
So Ymir was the one I usually took, which gave you an extra 4 inches of range on the guns. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it made a big difference when you're coming in from deep strike. Especially the shotguns on the bikes, which were only 12-inch, going from 12-inch to 16-inch. The shotguns made a big difference. It gave you extra AP within half range, which was huge, and it gave everything in the army a 5-up invuln. and if it was a 2-up armor, it was a 4-up embalm.
Right.
So it made the bikes more durable and that sort of thing. It made everything more durable, of course. But as far as how that stuff works, who knows what they're going to come up with? Because
I didn't know
the stuff they had in 9th edition was very powerful and it was a key part of the army.
So we didn't actually touch on that real quick before we head out. What is the detachment rule in the index?
It's just the judgment tokens.
Oh, judgment.
Judgment tokens, and the fact that you give out 2.
Okay,
so we give out 4 of them. 4 units get them at the beginning of the game.
We did talk about that. Then.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was a detachment.
Yeah.
Usually, when I ask that question, that's what comes up. All right, guys. Hey, thanks, Lane. Thanks for coming on, man.
Sure thing.
I appreciate it.
It's fun.
Yeah, guys, look forward to I'm sure if this is good, the Bat Rep's going to come out before this. If you haven't watched it, go back and watch it. Actually, it's a really good game. Lane did not ruin anything. We're just messing around. But it is a real good game. It pretty going back and forth was really good. And hopefully you got something out of this video that would help you in what you guys do if you're a Votann player. And
I'll check the comments too. So if anybody has any questions or anything, I'll check the comments on the video and respond as well.
Yeah, she beat me right to that because that was coming up. No, I'm glad. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I do have a Facebook link in there. You can hit me on Instagram. We can talk about it. Just hit comment below because I want everybody to be able to see these videos and talk about it and have a discussion in the comments that's productive. We want to be productive. We want to be positive. Trying to build a positive community. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and God bless, and peace out.